185,000 aircraft, 120,000 tanks, 55,000 anti-aircraft guns, 18 million tons of merchant shipping in 2 years. That is what Franklin Roosevelt puts before Congress in May 1940. Not a wish, not an aspiration, a production target. Hitler's advisors read the figures. They bring them to the Führer. Their verdict, American propaganda. Impossible numbers from a nation playing at war. Hitler agrees. An American intervention by mass deliveries of planes and war materials, he declares, will not change the outcome of the war. He is wrong about almost everything in that sentence. The error does not come from ignorance. It is December 11th, 1941. The Kroll Opera House, Berlin. 4 days after Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor. The chamber is draped in Nazi banners. The Reichstag deputies fill the seats. A largely ceremonial audience, men who vote as they are told and know it. Outside, Berlin is gray and cold, the kind of winter cold that settles into stone. Inside, Adolf Hitler takes the podium. He is 52 years old, the Iron Cross First Class pinned to his left breast. His posture in these photographs is still straight. The tremor beginning in his hands, for now, he manages to conceal. He's not here because he has to be. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor carried no treaty obligation to declare war on the United States. The Tripartite Pact required Germany to come to Japan's defense, not to invite American fury. He walks to that podium by choice. He charges Roosevelt with crimes against Germany, calls him a puppet of Jews and bankers. He describes the United States as a decayed country, its racial fragmentation, its social inequality, its distance from the real Europe, the evidence of its unfitness for total war. How, he asks, can one expect such a state to hold together? That afternoon, the Reichstag approves the declaration. Congress responds within hours. Both houses vote overwhelmingly for war. The United States, the country with the world's largest economy, with factories running 3 shifts that have never seen a bomb, with a population of 130 million that has not yet been asked to fight, enters the conflict. On paper, on December 11th, 1941, the American military is barely a sketch. Its professional army ranks 19th in the world. To its annual aircraft production stands at fewer than 3,000 planes. Its soldiers have not fought a major land war in 23 years. But that production target, 185,000 aircraft, 120,000 tanks, is already in motion. The factories are already retooling. The assembly lines are already shifting. Hitler knew this. He had read the reports. He had studied America with something close to fascination, and he declared war anyway. And that is not a story about miscalculation. It is a story about something far more dangerous. To understand why Germany lost the war it chose to start, you have to understand how the decision was possible in the first place. Not just one man's psychology, the architecture that made the decision structurally inevitable. Hitler had long been fascinated by America. The Hollywood film industry, the scale of its cities, the speed of its industry. And he had studied American racial legislation, the Jim Crow laws, the immigration restrictions, with something approaching approval. He understood, in other words, what the country was capable of producing. He had even expressed a wary respect for its industrial output. And yet, alongside that fascination ran a contempt that ideology required. America was a mongrel nation. Roosevelt was a puppet. Its racial fragmentation made it unfit for the demands of modern war, and a body with a powerful engine and no will to drive it. He, Hitler, had seen the opposite. A nation with inferior material and limitless will. He had bet everything on that principle. It had worked. France had fallen in 6 weeks. He saw no reason the equation would change. This was not a private prejudice the system might have corrected. It was the core assumption the entire German command structure was built around, and that structure was specifically designed to prevent it from being challenged. Albert Speer is 37 years old when Hitler appoints him Reich Minister of Armaments in February 1942. Tall and lean, with an architect's precise bearing, he had wanted, as a young man, to be a mathematician. He joined the Nazi Party in 1931 after hearing Hitler speak at a rally and never quite managed to leave. He will later claim he was an apolitical technocrat. The historian Adam Tooze called that claim absurd. What Speer understood was the arithmetic. Germany could not outproduce America. It could not match American manpower over a sustained campaign. Its only strategic cards were fighting quality, defensive leverage, and the hope that the coalition against it would fracture. He told Hitler as much, more than once, and then he kept the machine running anyway. Through administrative genius, through relentless efficiency, and through the slave labor of men and women worked to death in his factories. Around Speer and around Hitler, the command structure did its work. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the OKW, tall, rigidly erect, nicknamed Lackeytail by other generals, a contemptuous play on the word for lackey, functioned less as a strategic voice than as a transmission belt. Hitler's orders flowed out. Inconvenient assessments did not come back. General Alfred Jodl, the Keitel's operations counterpart, more capable, more privately aware of the trajectory, was too compromised by proximity to matter. Hitler managed his command structure deliberately, ensuring no single department could accumulate enough authority to force an inconvenient truth to the top. Every analysis that reached him passed through filters designed to confirm what he already believed. In this system, the most accurate intelligence assessment in the world could walk in the front door and dissolve before it reached the room where decisions were made. The spring is being compressed. It will take 2 more years for reality to collect its debt. By early 1943, the belief system meets something it cannot process: an American army in the field. February 19th, 1943. Central Tunisia. The Atlas Mountains. Jagged limestone ridges. Cold nights below freezing, hot days full of dust. And the pass itself is a narrow defile through the western dorsal, roughly 1,500 feet wide at its narrowest. It channels armor. It makes dispersion nearly impossible. For the Americans of the Second Corps, it is about to become the site of a disaster. Major General Lloyd Fredendall commands the Second Corps from a bunker blasted 70 feet into rock, 70 miles behind the front. He has never once visited his forward units in person, and he is directing a battle by telephone from a position so far removed from the fighting that his orders arrive late, wrong, and irrelevant. His men, green, poorly deployed, lacking the instinct for the terrain, meet Rommel's Afrika Korps in force for the first time. Approximately 6,500 American casualties across multiple engagements between February 19th and 24th. Positions abandoned, tanks destroyed or captured. For a stretch of days, the Afrika Korps is driving west through the pass with nothing in front of it. The German assessment, exactly what they expected. American soldiers are inferior, poorly led, unlikely to improve. General Alexander writes privately that the Americans are hopelessly trained. Montgomery concurs. The contempt moves up the chain. Erwin Rommel is more cautious. He has already noticed something in Tunisia that others are choosing not to see. The effectiveness of American artillery impresses him, and even now. In a letter to his wife from the front in February 1943, he describes the fighting around the pass with a restraint his superiors do not share. He recognizes that the Americans are learning. He recognizes what learning at this scale could mean. No one above him is listening, because here is what the German commanders miss, watching the defeat they have just inflicted. The Americans are watching it too. and drawing entirely different conclusions. Within days, Eisenhower restructures the Allied command in North Africa. He creates the 18th Army Group under General Harold Alexander. He replaces Fredendall, the man who directed a battle from 70 miles behind it, with Major General George S. Patton. The doctrinal corrections begin immediately. Air coordination, unit positioning. The Americans had needed a few months to absorb lessons that had taken the British 3 years. That compression was not a symptom of weakness, and it was a measure of how the army intended to fight. Finding the flaw, fixing what broke, and moving on before the enemy could press the advantage. May 13th, 1943. 12 weeks after Kasserine Pass, the Axis forces in Tunisia surrender. 267,000 German and Italian soldiers become prisoners of war. The Africa Corps, veterans of 3 years of desert fighting, irreplaceable in their experience, is gone. American forces take 25,000 prisoners in their sector alone, including 6 of the 12 generals captured. Germany won the battle. Drew the wrong lesson. Lost the campaign. America lost the battle. Drew the right lesson. And then it closed the trap. This is the hinge. Before Tunisia, Germany's strategic delusion is being constructed. After Tunisia, it is being dismantled, not by argument, but by arithmetic. The accumulation begins. The summer and autumn of 1943 do not deliver a single catastrophic blow. They deliver something worse, a steady, convergent weight of evidence that the underlying equation has changed. Each disaster arrives separately. Together, they form a case that cannot be answered. In May, the Battle of the Atlantic turns. Black May, the Kriegsmarine will call it. 43 U-boats sunk in a single month. Admiral Dönitz withdraws his submarines from the North Atlantic. The weapon that had come closest to strangling the supply lines from America, the wolf packs, the tonnage war, the strategy of starving Britain before it could be reinforced, is broken. The ocean highway is open, and what flows through it in 1943 alone: 85,898 aircraft, 29,497 tanks, more than 1,000 Liberty ships launched into service, vessels built using prefabricated sections, assembled in days, on in yards that had not existed 3 years before. The United States gross national product grows 52% between 1939 and 1944. Industrial output triples. Consumer spending rises. This is a country getting richer while it fights. Germany, by contrast, is consuming itself. Speer's armaments miracle is real. Production numbers climb through 1943, testament to what administrative genius and coercion can accomplish. But the miracle has a ceiling. Hitler refuses to conscript German women into armaments work. When Speer proposes it, slave labor from conquered territories is imported instead. Workers dying in harness do not maintain the tolerances that keep an aircraft engine running. And against the scale of what is happening in Michigan, the Willow Run bomber plant, 3 shifts around the clock under skies that have never held an enemy aircraft, the ceiling becomes a floor. Germany was a nation capable of producing as many munitions in 5 years as the United States could produce in 1. On the Eastern Front, Kursk fails in July. Sicily falls. The Allies land on mainland Italy in September. By autumn, the OKW situation reports have a different tone. Quieter, more careful. The pessimism runs underneath the language, constrained but present. Then, November 3rd, 1943. Hitler issues Directive number 51. The language is bureaucratic, and it speaks of consequences of staggering proportions if the Western Allies gain a foothold in Europe. It orders the reinforcement of Western defenses. It acknowledges, for the first time in an official document, that the threat from the West is existential. Not peripheral, not manageable, but the kind of threat that subordinates everything else. Read carefully. It is a confession. It is Hitler, on paper, admitting what his ideology had spent 2 years forbidding him to say. And the great simplification, American power is racially inert, America cannot fight, the Declaration of December 1941 was the correct move, is quietly, bureaucratically abandoned. What no one in the room says aloud, the Atlantic Wall that Directive No. 51 orders strengthened has been, for 2 years, quietly gutted. In 1942 and 1943, when the invasion threat was still distant, materials needed for its construction were diverted east. Some of the best men from the units stationed in France were stripped and sent to replace losses in Russia. By the end of 1943, what Hitler is now ordering reinforced is, in significant stretches, little more than a paper project. Rommel will discover this when he assumes command of Army Group B and begins his inspection in early 1944. He finds insufficient troops, weak defenses, no uniform plan. Now he is a man being asked to hold back the tide with what remains after the tide has already been used elsewhere. Late February 1944. The weather over central Germany has been miserable for weeks. Cloud cover, ice, limited visibility. Then a break comes. Lieutenant General James Doolittle is 47 years old, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a compact athlete's build and a permanent readiness in his posture. He commands the 8th Air Force, and he has been waiting for this window. And what he has, and what Germany has not yet fully reckoned with, is the P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter that can escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Doolittle does not intend to use it as a leash. Standard doctrine has been to keep the fighters close, protect the formation, absorb the Luftwaffe's interceptors. Doolittle changes it. He unleashes the P-51s ahead of the formation, hunting. The logic is clean and punishing. If the Luftwaffe rises to defend its factories, destroy it in the air. If it doesn't rise, destroy the factories anyway. There is no answer to this that doesn't cost Germany something it cannot replace. February 20th. The break holds. Nearly 4,000 heavy bombers and 800 fighters lift from airfields across England. Leipzig, Brunswick, Gotha, Regensburg, Schweinfurt, Augsburg, Stuttgart, Steyr, 11 cities. Over 6 days, 3,000 sorties. The Luftwaffe rises to meet them, as Doolittle calculated it must. 75% of the factories producing 90% of Germany's aircraft are damaged or destroyed. Hundreds of Luftwaffe planes are lost. Hundreds of experienced pilots, men who carry years of combat learning in their hands and instincts, go down over their own territory. The United States replaces its losses from big week within weeks. New P-51s roll off production lines in factories that have never been bombed. Pilots complete their accelerated training and report to unit. And Germany replaces its losses with older men, with younger men whose training has been shortened, with inferior aircraft built partly by workers, slave laborers, who sabotage the shells when no one is watching, so that ammunition fails at the moments it is needed most. The shield over the Reich is gone. American bombers can now reach anything in Germany, anywhere, at will. They have destroyed the Air Force that was supposed to stop them and replaced their own losses before the month was out. But the question hanging over every subsequent decision in the German High Command: what will they choose to hit next? The answer arrives on May 12, 1944. American heavy bombers strike the synthetic oil plant at Luna. Not on a map, a dramatic target. Not a city, not a headquarters, not a fortification. A chemical plant in central Germany, producing synthetic fuel. Albert Speer will later say, "I shall never forget the date, May 12th. The day the technological war was decided, he will call it And until that morning, his armaments ministry had managed, through administrative genius, through coercion, through the driven labor of the conquered, to produce approximately the weapons the armed forces needed. After that morning, there's not enough fuel to run them. This is the mechanism that unravels everything. German weapons production peaks in June and July 1944. Spears numbers at their highest. Tanks completing assembly. Aircraft passing final inspection. The armaments miracle is at its apex. And none of it moves. Without fuel, tanks sit where they are built. Aircraft are produced but cannot fly. The output squeezed from a besieged economy through 2 years of compounded cruelty is sitting in depots, waiting for fuel that will not come. There is something else happening inside the Speer ministry in the autumn of 1944, something that will not surface until after the war. In the production statistics flowing up to Hitler, the numbers that have sustained the belief in the armaments miracle are being falsified. Phantom weeks are added to the end of months to make the output curves appear sustained. The graphs show increase. The factories are producing collapse. The man who kept Germany fighting through the doctrine of will over material is now lying about the material to sustain the will. The circle of self-deception closes on itself. Hitler began the war lying about what America could produce. Speer ends it lying about what Germany can produce. The architecture of delusion, load-bearing from the start. June 6, 1944. The coast of Normandy. The invasion comes ashore against a defense hampered at every level by Allied air superiority that disrupts every movement, by Osttruppen, soldiers transferred from the Eastern Front, deemed unreliable against the Russians. Filling a sixth of the rifle battalions in Normandy, is by an Atlantic wall that exists in stretches of concrete and on paper, but not in the continuous, prepared depth it was supposed to represent. German reinforcements cannot reach the beaches. Allied paratroopers land with minimal opposition. The coastal artillery, largely neutralized by air attack before the first soldier wades ashore, cannot find its targets. Rommel cannot get his armor to the beaches during the hours that matter. The strategic argument over where to position the armored reserve was lost before the invasion arrived, and the losing of it is visible in the gap between where the tanks are, where the soldiers need them. By July, Rommel is traveling by staff car on a road in Normandy when a Royal Air Force Spitfire finds it. The strafing attack wounds him severely. He will never return to command. In October 1944, given the choice between a public trial and a private death, Sir Erwin Rommel swallows poison in the back seat of a car and is given a state funeral by the regime he served. In Tunisia, he had recognized what the Americans were before his commanders were willing to hear it. He had seen what the Atlantic Wall was when he inspected it. He filed the reports. He was given a poison choice and made it alone. He is 52 years old. May 1945. Allied intelligence teams move through a defeated Germany. Now, one of their first and most valuable targets is Albert Speer. He is not in a uniform. He is in a suit, well cut, precise, the presentation of a man who has arranged his circumstances carefully. For 7 straight days, he sits with American interrogators and answers their questions with what they will describe as remarkable candor. One of them will admit privately that Speer evoked in them a sympathy of which they were all secretly ashamed. He explains how the Nazi war machine worked, and he explains with analytical precision how it was broken. He walks his interrogators through the bombing campaigns, the targeting sequences, what he calls bombing high school, the progression of decisions that dismantled German industrial capacity from the inside out. He is fluent, almost collegial. And then he describes how he organized Germany's factories for maximum output. He cites Henry Ford, the Ford manufacturing principles, the efficiency architecture of the Rouge River plant, adapted to wartime production, applied to the factories of the Reich. The man who extended the war through slave labor he directly supervised, in facilities running human beings to death in service of a production philosophy he had borrowed, is explaining his methods to Americans by crediting the man whose industrial thinking helped defeat him. The numbers that close the argument: the United States produced 300,000 aircraft during the war. Germany produced approximately 119,000. 2,710 Liberty ships built in 4 years in American yards that never stopped running and never heard a bomb. A war expenditure of nearly $300 billion, sustained by an economy that grew while it spent. Industrial output tripled, civilian standard of living rising, factories intact from the first day to the last. Joseph Stalin, the man who fought the bloodiest war in human history, Han who lost more soldiers at Stalingrad alone than America lost when the entire conflict, raised a glass at Tehran in November 1943 and offered a toast. He said that without American production, Russia would have lost the war. This was not diplomacy, it was arithmetic. Keitel and Jodl, the transmission belt and his more capable deputy, the two men who ensured that no inconvenient truth fully reached the room where decisions were made, hang at Nuremberg in October 1946. The command architecture that made December 11th, 1941 possible has its accounting there, under the lights of a gymnasium in a ruined city. The production lines at Willow run 3 shifts around the clock, in a country whose workers have never heard a bomb fall in anger. They run while Hitler declares war. They run while Rommel is fighting in Tunisia, and while Rommel is losing in France, and while Rommel is making his choice in the back seat of a car in October. So they run while the Luftwaffe is shattered over Germany, and while the oil plants burn, and while the phantom weeks are added to production curves that no longer mean anything. They run until they don't need to anymore. He knew what it was. He had read the reports. He had studied the factories and the figures and the production targets his advisors told him were propaganda. He walked to the podium at the Kroll Opera House in December 1941 and declared war on it anyway, and it fought forever.